All right, so
Yeah.
you know how everyone's always talking about the dollar, like how powerful it is globally?
Yeah.
Well, get this. There was actually a time when South Africa's rand was even stronger.
Really?
Yeah, no kidding. Back in the early 70s, 1 rand could get you more than a US dollar.
Wow.
So how did that happen? What changed? That's exactly what we're going to be diving into today.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, we're going to unravel how these huge global events like switching from the gold standard to the petrodollar changed South Africa's economy.
Okay.
We'll also look at the roles that apartheid and global sanctions played.
Right.
And we'll even tackle that whole issue of dollar-denominated debt.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are curious about that.
Yeah, for sure. And then finally, we'll see if there's any hope for them to become more independent economically, like with that whole BRICS thing.
That's a big question these days.
Yeah. So let's start with the basics. Before 1971, the world basically ran on this system where currencies were pegged to gold.
Right, the gold standard.
Exactly. And so South Africa, with all its gold mines, naturally had a really strong currency.
It makes sense when you put it that way.
Yeah. And, like in 1971, rand could get you like $1.40.
Seriously.
Yeah. And this gold-backed system really helped South Africa's economy grow like a lot.
Yeah, we're talking like huge growth at times. Their annual GDP was increasing by more than 5% sometimes.
Wow, that's incredible. So were people like driving around in gold-plated cars?
Not quite. But the government was definitely putting a lot of money into building stuff like infrastructure. And it really helped boost industries like mining and manufacturing and agriculture.
So basically everything was going great for them.
Yeah, they were doing really well for a while. In the early 70s, they were producing something like 70% of all the gold in the world.
So they're basically sitting pretty then, huh? But I guess being so reliant on gold also made them kind of vulnerable, right? Especially when the U.S. went and ditched the gold standard in the 70s.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The U.S. needed to find another way to keep the dollar strong globally, and that's when they made that deal with Saudi Arabia.
Oh, right. Saudi Arabia, the biggest oil producer back then.
Exactly. They agreed to only sell oil in U.S. dollars.
Wow.
And that created this massive demand for dollars around the world.
And that's how the whole petrodollar thing was born.
Yep.
So basically, overnight, everyone needed dollars instead of gold.
Pretty much.
That must have been a huge blow to South Africa. They relied so much on buying oil from other countries.
You're right to wonder about that. It definitely changed things for them.
So what happened?
Well, imagine being forced to suddenly buy all your important stuff, like oil, using a currency that keeps going up and down compared to your own money.
Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. It creates a lot of instability and weakens your buying power.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to buy groceries with monopoly money.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, something like that.
But hold on, didn't South Africa go through this massive industrial boom around the same time? Yeah, that's true. From the 1940s to the 60s, South Africa saw a ton of industrial growth.
So what's the catch?
Well, it happened during apartheid, which was this awful system of racial segregation. And it basically meant that only the white minority got to enjoy the benefits while the black majority was left out.
So even though some parts of the economy were doing great, it wasn't really fair for everyone.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that economic growth doesn't always mean things are getting better for everyone.
That's a really important point.
And the rest of the world started to notice in the 1980s, a bunch of countries decided to put sanctions on South Africa to try and force their government to end apartheid.
Right, the sanctions.
Exactly.
So what kind of sanctions are we talking about here, and like what effect did they have?
Well, they did a lot of different things. Some countries stopped buying stuff from South Africa, which cut them off from important markets.
Right.
Others stopped investing in South Africa, which slowed down their economic growth. And then there were also these arms embargoes, which were basically trying to stop them from getting weapons.
To weaken the apartheid regime, basically.
Yeah, all these sanctions together really did a number on South Africa's economy. They weakened the rand even more and slowed down their business.
So basically, South Africa was dealing with the after effects of the petrodollar switch. They were struggling with these sanctions, and they still had the legacy of apartheid hanging over them. It was a really complicated situation.
Yeah, it was a rough time for them.
And then on top of all that, there's that issue of dollar-denominated debt. Can you break that down for our listeners who might not really know what that means?
Sure. So basically, when a country borrows money in a foreign currency like U.S. dollars, they're basically gambling on how the exchange rate will change in the future.
So it's kind of risky?
Yeah, if the dollar gets stronger compared to their own currency repaying, that debt suddenly becomes way more expensive.
So even if South Africa is making money in rand, They're still at the mercy of what the dollar decides to do.
Exactly. And this dependence on the dollar has real consequences for everyday people in South Africa.
Like how?
Well, it can make things they import more expensive, which leads to inflation and makes everything cost more for ordinary South Africans.
So, like, even if the price of oil stays the same globally, South Africans could still end up paying more for gas just because the rand is weaker against the dollar.
Exactly. That's the power that the dollar has.
Man, that paints a pretty grim picture. Is there any chance for South Africa to break free and become more economically independent?
Well, there are some promising developments going on right now. South Africa is part of BRICS, which is this group of countries, including Brazil, Russia, India, and China.
BRICS, right? I've heard of them.
Yeah, and they're really looking into alternative ways to do business without always relying on the US dollar.
That's interesting.
They're even talking about creating their own shared currency to use for trade within the group.
Whoa, that would be huge. What else are they thinking about doing?
Investing in renewable energy is a big one.
That makes sense.
If they can rely less on imported oil, which is priced in dollars, they'll have more control over their energy costs and won't be so affected by changes in the exchange rate.
So like, they could be powered by all that sunshine they have.
Yeah, exactly. It could totally change the game for them.
So we've talked about a lot of stuff today, from the gold standard to the petrodollar, from apartheid to those global sanctions, and the whole issue of dollar-denominated debt.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
It's crazy how much South Africa's economy has been influenced by what's happening in the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Their story shows how connected we all are these days and how decisions made on one side of the planet can cause a ripple effect all the way over on the other side and affect how people live their daily lives.
Yeah, it's like that butterfly effect thing.
Exactly.
But we've also seen that South Africa isn't just sitting back. They're actively trying to find solutions, whether it's through BRICS or by switching to renewable energy.
Yeah, they're not giving up.
And it leaves us with the question, what if this BRICS common currency thing actually works out? Could we see a future where the dollar isn't so powerful and we have a new system where things are more balanced? And if that happens, what will South Africa's role be?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
I guess so.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive.
My pleasure.
Until next time.